Welcome everyone to another CTC software webinar. My name is Chris Bircher, Director of Technical Services here at CTC, and today we are going to discuss the installation methods for the BIM Suites and make sure that you understand everything that there is to know about installing the BIM Suites products. Before we begin though, if you're attending live, I encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar using the questions panel and area within the webinar toolbar that you got. I'll be monitoring it and we'll answer them in line and as it makes sense. Anything that's left over, I will answer at the end of the presentation. If you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, because it will be on YouTube, post a comment below. And we are monitoring those as well, and we will be sure to respond to those accordingly. With that said, let's just jump right into it. So if you've been working with us and consuming our products for some time now, you may have noticed that we have changed our installers in the last year to 16 months. And today, I'm going to explain all of it. We've had a lot of questions come up about how to do this, which one's for that, so on and so forth. So hopefully today I can answer all those questions for you and show you guys how to install the products in the most efficient manner possible. So we're going to basically go through and explain the different installers that we have. If you've been to our website recently, you'll know that we now have two different installers. I'm going to explain the difference between those, and hopefully that'll get you more information on which one you should be using for your environment. We're going to walk through the options together so you know how to install the product and how to configure it to meet your needs as best as possible. And then we'll show you how to do a scripted install, because some of us like to deploy it. Some of us just like to make it available, but we have specific settings we want to push out and make available as well. So we'll go through this whole process from start to finish, top down, inside and out, make it happen. So overview time. So there are, before we even get to the different types of installers, a little over a year ago, we used to have an installation file for every single suite. So there was the BIM Project Suite, BIM Manager Suite, BIM Batch Suite, BIM Data Suite, SuperDoor, and Caseware Configurator, right? And so that's 6 products. And if you owned multiples of that, you were needing to update multiple installation files. And you had a script potentially that installed multiple things at the same time, or you were just installing manually. We consolidated that into a single installer, which is now called the CTC BIM Suites installer. So one MSI file to install all of our BIM products. And we did that across the board. Our civil side, we have the Sim Suites, we consolidated there. Hive has a number of different applications that goes along with it, we consolidated there. Right? Try to minimize the number of different installations you needed to run to stay current with us. Now, at that point, we also wanted to make the installs as easy as possible for everyone, meaning for deployment purposes, or if you're just a user that needs to install it and you're the only one that needs to be using it, or you're needing and you don't want to worry about admin permissions or anything like that, right? So we have 2 different installers for the BIM Suites. We have a single user installer, we have a multi-user installer, and that will be present on our webpage when you go to download it. I'll point that out and show you guys there in momentarily. What does that mean? The single user installer, the big thing there is that it no longer requires admin privileges to install. So anyone, you could have your computers locked down by IT, and you technically could still install this, Now, you don't necessarily want to, because that's the whole point, and they're going to be managing that, and at any rate, you probably aren't going to use that in your office to begin with. But the whole point is that there's no admin privileges, and when installed, whoever runs that install gets that product. No one else on the machine has access to it. It'll appear that it was never installed if someone else logged in and looked for the tools. So single user means current user only when the install is run. If you were to try to script that and say run as admin, the admin would get that. It would install to the admin profile, not to the desired user's profile. And that desired user would not have any idea that that tool was installed in the first place. So the multi-user installer is the traditional installation toolkit like we had a couple of years ago, where it requires admin privileges. If you're going to script it, there's the run as admin feature within a batch routine. You would have to run as admin, and then it installs to the machine, and anyone that logs into that machine will have access to the tools. So there's a couple of major differences there between what you're getting depending on which installer you use. And so you want to be careful and choose wisely. Cleaning it up and starting over and going back and switching back and forth between installers to find out which one you like, no big deal there. But once you decide what you want, stay consistent. Having both a multi-user installer and a single-user installer on the same machine will not work. So you can't cross them up on the same device. And I don't even recommend using some single-user installers in your office and some multi-user installers in your office. It becomes a management headache. It's just best if you pick one and stick with it. It'll make deployments and setups and everything easier across the board if you just have one thing to manage and one thing to worry about. All right, now, and I've kind of alluded to this a little bit without clearly stating it. There are two methods of installation. There is an interactive install or a manual install, where you get all the nice little dialog windows and pop-ups, and you physically have to click next all the way through. And then there is the scripted or silent install, as it is sometimes referred to. It's a script that runs, that will do all the installations for you, and it can run silently or quietly so that there is no interaction. You run a script, it does its thing, tools are installed. The nice thing about doing it this way is we can customize additional settings for licensing, for button visibility, or who has access to which tools and which suites via Active Directory or group policy, right? We have some additional controls with a scripted install. And we're going to go through and discuss all of it. All right. First one we're going to hit though is the interactive installer or the manual install. Now, if you don't have a copy of the tools already, or you're looking to get the update, to download it, you just go to our website, ctcsoftware.com, and you can log into our portal. If you've got an account with us, you can log in, and there'll be a nice big fat blue download button on the right side of your web page. You download it, you extract it, and start running through the install. And that's where I'm going to jump in and show you how to walk through the install. And there's a couple of different options that are baked into it that you can work with. Then there's a couple of post-installation options for repairing and modifying that we're going to talk about. So we got a lot to do. Okay, now I've already downloaded these. However, I am going to quickly show you where to get them. So on our website, ctcsoftware.com, I'm actually already at the download page here. So I'm just going to take a step backwards. And if you've got an account with us, you can log into the portal here. Click login securely and type in your credentials accordingly. And there we go. And boom, downloads button right there. You click downloads button, you get your access to your tools. And depending on which ones you're working with, it'll bring you back to that page that I was at previously and select single user installer, multi-user installer. Choose which one you want to use. Now, again, remember, single user does not require admin privileges and will only be available for that user, whoever runs the install. Multi-user installs to the machine does require admin privileges. So just want to pound that in because it's very important. All right. I've done the download. I've got the files already extracted. And here's what we're going to do. I'm going to start with the single user installer because I want to point out the differences here. Because this is the one that's going to throw some people off, and I want to make sure everybody understands how this one works. We're going to do a silent and scripted install with the BIM Suites one. So first, you double-click the MSI, and you'll get your install window. And it's telling you right out of the gate what you're going to get, which products are being installed, and what versions of Revit are being supported. Latest and greatest version is 24.3. And we'll just start walking through. I agree to the terms in the EULA. If you haven't read it, you should probably read it. Here's where you have some options within the installer. You can take the default and just do a complete install. If you run the complete install, you will get every single product installed on your device. Batch suite, manager suite, project suite, data suite, SuperDoor, and casework configurators. You get everything. If you know right away that you don't want everything, you can hit the custom install option and hit next, where you'll get to choose which products you want to see. If there is something that you know you don't have a license for, and nor will you, and you're familiar with the tools and you know you don't need it, you can make it unavailable. Or if you're going to someone's machine and you know they will not be using Manager Suite because they don't need it. They need Project Suite and Batch Suite. So you can take Manager Suite and make it unavailable. And that is quite all right. That's why we have these features here, because not everyone needs access to everything. And that's perfectly fine. So I'm actually going to go ahead and disable just a couple. Actually, I'm not going to disable anything because I need them to show you where file locations are going to end up. But just make sure this feature will not be available if you don't want it. There's another way we can remove those after the fact, and I'll show you that when the install is complete. So we'll hit next. Now, on the last page here, before you hit install, we have the ability to include the CTC PDF printer. The printer does require admin privileges. So if you don't have admin privileges on your machine, the printer will not get installed. You'll get everything else, you just won't get the PDF driver. 9 times out of 10, that's going to be okay because you'll have probably Adobe or Bluebeam or the Microsoft PDF, which is fine. We include this in case you don't. All right, so the install, pretty quick, runs through, doing all the things that I needed to. And while that's cooking, I'm going to open up another Explorer window here and start getting ready to navigate to the installation directories. Now, the key thing to remember, all done, pretty quick. That's a lot for installing 6 products. That's really quick for installing 6 products. The key thing to remember is where the tools are being installed, okay? Now, because I'm the active user, I'm the one who's logged in, the tools are being installed to my Windows profile. So if I go to users, Crispy, app data, now we're finding out where the tools are installed for me and only me. If Sean, my coworker, were to log into my computer and try to utilize the tools at this point, he would not see them, and his profile would tell him nothing's been installed. So he would have to install the tools himself to have access to them. Okay, so CTC, app data, roaming, CTC software, all the goodies are here. And these basically 5 folders here are the ones that let you know that officially the products have been installed and it's a single user setup. That's the one way to kind of guarantee that you know is where the common Revit and the authenticator folders are living. If they're in your user profile account here like this, that means it's a single user setup. And that's the kind of the obscure way to find that out. The easier way is just to look at it in the control panel because it tells you single user installer. It's pretty straightforward. We named it that way on purpose. But if you're just browsing around and you happen to see this, now you know. Okay, so everything gets installed here. Another piece that's majorly different is where a lot of the settings file go and where the add-in files themselves go. Now, in the settings location, as far as setting up suite settings and additional license settings for visibility and are we doing network floating versus cloud shared license, all of that is being saved to the public folder under CTC software and licensing. And in here is where you'll have your files that control who has access to what products on that machine and what license server potentially it's pointing to. Is it pointing to our network license server internally? Is it a cloud share license somewhere else? You know, once we invoke the tools and we start firing things off, you'll see a bunch of text files start to populate this location, right? And that is a fixed location. We put it in public so that if you did have multiple users needing the single user setup on a particular machine, like a VM or a Citrix VDI node type of deal, everyone would have access to the public folder where all of the system-wide settings would live. So that's why we chose this location. Last but not least are add-in files. All of the add-in files still go to the Autodesk folders, except it's, again, behind the user folder. So many of you may not remember or know, Revit has add-ins or add-in folders kind of all over the place. I think there's 3 or 4 different locations where add-in files actually live. There's the traditional method, which is behind program data, which many of us are familiar with. But then there's also the one behind the user profile, which is where we're going now. And that's where our tools get installed to now. And that's where all the add-in files and the associated bundle folders with all the additional content, that's where they are being deployed. And that's really it. There's not a whole lot else there, right? The install is the same as the multi-user installer, right? The end result is the same. You get tools in Revit. It's just where are the tools being installed to? In this case, behind the user profile. Then another piece that I want to point out regarding the installer is some of the additional post-installation settings that you have access to. So I've already pulled this up here in my add remove features within, or apps and features in Windows. You can also go through the control panel and look at add remove programs that way. Same result. You see the product, CTC BIM Suites, single user installer. We now have a modify button. And I think in the control panel, it's like change or remove or something like that, or change repair. Ultimately, when you click the modify button or the change remove button, it brings up the installer window again, but allowing you to decide, what do I want to do next? Do I want to modify the install? Do I want to just run a quick repair, which restores everything back to its defaults, or uninstall it, right? If I do modify at this stage, I get this window again, and now I get to pick and choose which products I need or don't need. Maybe I made a mistake and I turned the wrong product off for a particular user. Well, now I can turn it back on. Or maybe I've gone through the products and I've tried everything out, and I've already got my door families. I've got what I need. We can turn off Super Door. And maybe I don't need casework. Or maybe you're an engineer and you're never going to use doors in casework families. Turn them off. There's no point in polluting your ribbon if you're never going to use the tools. Take them, hit next, hit install. It'll run the update, and it's going to remove those product folders from your machine and ultimately clean up your ribbons within Revit and make so that you will no longer see the SuperDoor and Casework tools in your sessions. All right, now, before we move on too far, I'm gonna do this. I'll move this over here for the time being. And step 2, interact, or the silent/scripted installs. Now this works with both to an extent. I've kind of written this out for the multi-user setup, but it will work in a single user setup with some slightly different information. And I will point that out kind of as we go along through the line and show you that you can do a scripted install on a single user environment. I've got an example I can show you. All right, now, the way that I typically set this up, if I'm doing a scripted install for my firm, and I want to use a multi-user setup because I'm IT, I want to manage everything. I don't typically let people do their own installs. I've kind of got it locked down a little bit. So everything needs to be deployed by an administrator. That's where multi-user is in the perfect situation and the perfect setup for those types of environments. So that's how we're going to configure this today. So what I like to do personally is I like to run the installer on my machine, my personal machine, or a test machine, so that I can extract the contents of in various settings files that I need access to, so that I can customize them slightly and just enough so that when I deploy this to the end users, they get my settings that I think they should have, instead of giving everyone the stock default settings and letting them kind of figure out how the license setup is supposed to work and choosing what the license options are, or maybe turning off products that they don't need access to, or however that works, right? There's a couple of different options here that we'll talk through. So I grab my settings files. I'll make changes to my settings files. Then I start making my batch routine or my install routine. And I'll walk you through that part. And then the deployment option. I'll do my test as an administrator, make sure that the tools install, make sure that the files are being copied accordingly. And then then I decide how to make it available to everyone else. Are we going to deploy it via Software Center or PDQ or something along those lines? Or am I going to do a forced deployment via a login script / group policy deal and install it with Revit or with a Revit update? You've got a couple of different ways to go on about doing that. And that's entirely up to you how you want to make that available. I'm a small outfit. Sometimes I just walk over to the machine and do it for them because I've got 8 people, right? Not that much for me, but I still prefer a scripted environment so that I don't have to pick and click each and every single little button. So with a scripted install, and before I get too far ahead of myself, I do want to point out all of this is in the user guide, which I've just pulled up here. So there is a installation and configuration user guide that is available to you, and it should be present in the zip folder when you download. It is also present as soon as you finish an install. You can open it up and it will explain a lot of the custom configurations that you can do. And that all happens starting here on page 50 for custom installation using command line parameters for your silent / scripted install. And it's all here. Everything I'm showing you today, it's here. The language, the switches, how to manage and set up licensing for floating and cloud shared, it's all here. So everything I'm showing you today is in the user guide. I want to point that out. So for a basic setup, you have the initial install language. It's an MSI file, so we use the MSI exec call /I for an install, right? Now, mine currently is set up to pull. I didn't include this language at the top, but you'll see it here when we do the example. I've got it pulled from a specific directory that I've set current, which is why you don't see the file path listed here. But I got the installer name, and then I've got a /q here to run quietly, right? So there won't be any interaction by the end users to run through this installer, okay? That's it. Additional switches that are available to you, you have the ability to control your license settings, whether it's a cloud shared license or a floating license server. You can control if they need the CTC PDF writer or not. And actually this should say, oops, that should say 1 if you do want it, 0 for not. And then you have the product install controls. And that is a deselect suite abbreviation or the code, I guess, equals 1. And again, those codes are in the user guide here on this page right here. The product and the parameter, or it's this little BPS, BMS, BBS, BDS, CC, or SD. Those are little codes that I'm referring to. Punch that in where it says suite code. That product is not getting installed. And then for any additional settings that need to be deployed, it's just a copy function to get certain files from one location placed into the default location so that users don't have to worry about it themselves, okay? So these are super basic. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it'll look sort of like this. This is a very small snippet of what we got in here. But again, I'm going to walk you through it. We'll take you through the steps on how I did this, okay? Now, let's see here. I'm actually just going to, well, I wanted to minimize that, but I have to do it this way. All right. Okay. Keep it simple. First thing I'm going to do is, like I mentioned, I like running the install so that I get the full, complete installation system with all the settings files. And I'm on my, test builder machine, let's say. So I'm just going to do a full, complete install of the multi-user installer. In this case, we'll get it all. And while that's installing, there's a couple of questions that I'm going to answer. Does your script work with PDQ? So it's just a bat routine. There may be some specifics that need to be changed simply for PDQ to be able to do its thing. And I'm not terribly familiar with PDQ, but I know individuals or firms that I've worked with over the years that are using PDQ and are able to successfully deploy the CTC BIM Suites via PDQ using the multi-user installers. All right, so here's that installation and configuration guide that I was showing to you. You get a prompt right here at the end of the install to go ahead and fire that off. I've already got it open, so I'm not going to do that. And then if the user had installed a product pointing toward a network license, what is the recommended way to transition that to a cloud license instead? Okay, I will cover that. I'll come back to that question because we're not there yet, but there is a way to do it, and I'll show you how to do that. And could you add a custom install example in the zip download? Maybe eventually, but for now, if you need it, just reach out to info@ctcsoftware.com and I'll get you one. Since getting it into the zip download would take a little bit of time yet. So you might as well just ask us directly and I'll hook you up. All right, install complete. So now I'm going to back out of this location and quickly show you where things went. So I did the multi-user install. It goes to CTC software or program data, CTC software. And then here are those common Revit, common BIM suites, or a CTC BIM Suites authenticator, right? Those are the three that are kind of those indicators. I got a certain install type, right? So in my BIM Suites folder specifically, there's a common files folder for each of the products that got installed. So I've got everything installed. I didn't change a thing. Within those folders are suite settings. Those suite settings help you as the administrator determine who gets access to what. And we can do it just manually and block things out so they don't have access to it, or we can do this via Active Directory assignments and specify what those Active Directory groups are. Currently, it's assigned to everyone, so if they have the tools installed, they have access to it. Right? So we can control who has access to this stuff. So if you want to determine, keep it simple, right, and just run the installer, yet control product access via Active Directory, you can do that. You can have a group called admins, and only admins get access to Manager Suite, Project Suite, Batch Suite, and Data Suite, for example. Standard drafters or designers, they get access to the Project Suite and maybe one or two tools from the Manager Suite, like say DIM Checker and Project Cleaner, and then Batch Suite, let's say. And then, so you have the ability to control that. And it's all just a matter of making sure that you specify what those AD groups need to be. And then you do it at either at the individual app level. So maybe Project Processor is not an everyone app, maybe it's an admin app. And as long as I've got an admin group and my BIM management team is in that admin group, they will have access to it. Everyone that's not in that group will not. They won't even see it. So you can go ahead and make these changes. We deploy a fresh copy every single time we do an update, but you don't have to deploy that fresh copy. As long as you have this here, you should be good to go. It's kind of a one-time push at this point. But what you want to do is grab these settings files. If you want to manage it and control your products that way and kind of pick and choose who gets access to which apps, grab the suite settings file. There is another set of settings files that we need to pull, and those are the license settings files. And let me open up this other folder. Nope, not. Sorry, I've got a couple open here for this. No, that wasn't it either, but that's okay. I know where it was. So I've already pulled these out because I want to make sure you see what it looks like here. So I've got a little directory that I've pulled together that has my suite settings files for every product, and then it's the license settings files for every product. Now, again, I want to show you those as well because those are important. And I believe, no, hold on, sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Pretty sure they're supposed to go here. Anyway, I've got it listed here somewhere. I forget. I'm getting myself wrapped up. At any rate, you need these license settings. And this is where I answer another question for the license type, okay? And when installed and the products are up and running, these files all need to live in the licensing folder. So right now, yours are likely all set to say something like network floating, or not, maybe not all of you, but many of you are probably still using the good old network license file tied to your server, which is the server name. So, in my case, it's CDB laptop. That's my server name. If that's what this license file will look like for everyone's machine. Now it knows what the license type is and where to look for that active license. If it's just cloud shared, you've moved forward and it is just cloud shared, that's all it needs to say. There is no server path. And the license type here is cloud shared instead of network floating. okay? If you're trying to transition between network floating to the new cloud shared or the newer cloud shared system, all you need to do is redeploy these license configured settings to all the users' machines, okay? And you can do that the next time you want to roll out an update, or you can do that midway through and it's just a bat routine that does a standard copy. And you can collect all the files off the user's machines, make changes to the settings files, and push them out accordingly. Okay? Now, the reason why some of these files aren't showing up properly is because Revit never got open. So I'm just going to fire it up real quick so I can point out where those license settings files are. I've already extracted them myself, so we can start building out a couple of different setups here. So I grabbed them all. I put them into my little installation directory for my common suite settings. Okay. Now we get to build the fun stuff. Now, this all really just begins in a text document. Called BIM Suites install. And then it's not just your standard text file, it's a BAT file for this example. And really to load this up into any sort of software center / PDQE type of deal, it's going to be a version of a routine file like this. But because I've now labeled it as a .bat, I have to right click and edit this either in just plain Notepad, or I can do it in Notepad++. Either one works out just fine. And I now have my blank screen. So we need to build it out. Now, what I personally have done on my setup is I have created an installation directory on my local C drive to set this up. And that way it makes it easy for me personally. I download the tools, I save them to that folder, I run my extractions, and then I can double click my routine and it runs my installs. There's a little bit of extra script language that you need to pull off to get it, if it's mapped to a network drive, to get it to run consistently. But at the same time, you don't really need to do, you IT guys will know that way better than I do. All right. So, I have the wrong path here. So I'm going to change this to be that. Oops. All right, so what I've got here, first things first, I have my installs saved here. So this is the directory that I want to make my default directory for this exercise. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm changing, when you open up a command prompt window, which is effectively all this is running in, right? It's defaulting to the C users and the active username. I'm changing this to be this. That's effectively what I'm doing at this point. And that is simply so that when I'm building out the rest of my routine, I don't have to spell out the explicit file path each and every single time that I need to create a new line for this. I can just, it already knows that if it's in this folder, it's going to find it. Okay. And that also then I could even, so that works great for the install files. If I were to just leave it at this, it would be a different sort of versioned file path, but that would also make finding my my settings files a little bit easier to track down, because those are just back here in this common settings folder. So kind of up to you how you want to do it. I'm going to do it this way and just focus on the install part first. Okay, so I've got that. Anytime you have like an echo listed in here, that just means that I'm following up with a basic note. So right now the title of this is CTC BIM Suites Multi-User Installer. And if I were just to run this myself on my computer, I'll see a little DOS window that pops up, and this will be that little kind of hello title. You don't necessarily need to do this if you're scripting it for a software center or PDQ type of deployment, but I do it just so that I know something's firing off when I'm testing it on my local machine. Okay, and then the next piece here is, again, probably another status notifier here with the install piece, which just happens to be this. So let's get my little title in, installing BIM Suites, and the string that I need to run is my MSI exec /I for install. And then because I'm already sourcing this 24.3 folder, I can simply put in the install file name. You could also, at this point, script a single user setup. And instead of the multi-user installer, I can say single user installer. And that's okay too. Again, as long as you are aware of what you're trying to accomplish, you can script both of these, just as long as you are holding true to using one or the other. Don't try to pull off and use both. It's not going to work very well. And then /Q for silent. I believe the /QN is another quiet version where there's no UI involved, and then there's the QB, which is a basic UI that doesn't really do a whole lot. It just kind of shows you a status bar, I believe. I don't, obviously, if you're trying to do a true silent deployment, you're not going to put that stuff in there. But /Q or /QN are the two that'll work. And then we start putting the switches in. And do I want, what's my license type? Is it a network license or is it a cloud shared license? If you're doing cloud shared in your update, it's going to look like this. Okay, cloud shared licensing equals true. And that way, when the tools are fired off for the first time, it'll be expected, or you'll get a login window as your prompt, and you'll type in your cloud shared license credentials. And as long as you have access to the tools, you'll get your license. And assuming a license is also available. The other option is this, floating lick server equals, in my case, whatever your server name is, CDB laptop, right? Simple, not a whole lot to it. So depending on what your license type is today, you're either going to use the cloud shared or the network floating. I'm going to go with cloud shared in this example. Now I get to decide, do I need the PDF driver or not? So there's a switch for that you just put right at the end. CTC install PDF writer. I've got mine set to equal 0, which is saying do not install it. If you don't need it because you're using something else, no need to install it. I like using it sometimes as a test to make sure that my other PDF drivers are working because this one is very nice and lightweight. It seems to work quite often. But if you don't need it, you don't need it, and that's okay. Then which products do I need in this installer? You can use the deselect switch for a particular product if you know it's something that you don't need installed on this machine. So in this case, I have deselected BIM Data Suite, Casework Configurator, and SuperDoor. And that is what will happen if I tell it to run at this point. I'm not going to get any of those 3 products. And then just for good measure, I like throwing a little timeout in here at the end, just to make sure that if I'm running, multiple installs for whatever reason, if I'm going to pair this up with Hive, or maybe you're deploying it with another product, like, another Revit add-in of sorts, or Revit update or something along those lines, just to give there a little buffer in between one install and the next. You don't always need it. I just like doing it. I tend to pair mine up with my SIM installers and my Hive installers. So I'm running BIM Suites, SIM Suites, and my Hive setup. So I like having a little timeout built in. Then the next step here, well, you could be done, right? If you didn't need to copy any additional settings files across, you can just be done. Call it a day. Now, if you're running this as a fresh install for the first time, there may be some suite settings that you want to deploy. So if you are actually using all of the products, then there are 6 suite settings files to be included, right? And those, oops, here we go. Those were the ones that I had pulled. Where did I put that folder now? Oh, that's my common settings folder, sorry. Well, I'll just go back to it here. Program data, CTC software, BIM suites. From here, these batch suite, data suite, manager suite, common files, right? So here's where we have those suite settings text files. If you wanted to control who has access to what tool via Active Directory, and you've configured these things accordingly, you'll want to get those deployed to the user's machines, right? So it's a copy function, very simple. I've included my little /y in here in case that's just part of my stock deployment, and that everyone will have. Just that way, I'm always pushing out the latest and greatest version. If that file exists already on that location, it's going to get updated, no problem. And then in my quotes, where the file exists now, which is in my common settings folder, to where it's got to go at the end of the day, which is C users public CTC software suite settings. Right? This is where these files have to live. Perfect. And if you're doing this for all the products, you'll have 6 of them. In my case today, I'm only pushing out 3: batch suite, manager suite, project suite. So I've got those pre-built because I cheated a little. So same path. Remember, I pulled everything into my common suite settings folder. Here's my 3 files. They've all been configured accordingly. Here's the end result location. Beautiful. And again, if you want, if you're doing this as yourself and you want to make sure that things are functioning as you expect them to, you can put a nice little piece in here that says, hey, we're copying our suite settings. Okay, great. Now, if you're transitioning from network floating to cloud shared licensing, this is the perfect time to put in the copy function to update the license settings files on your users' machines to now no longer use network floating, but to use the cloud shared schema, right? And it's another, so those license settings that I had mentioned to you, now that I've opened Revit, I'm just going to pull those up, but I'll put one of those paths in here so you can see where it's going to go at the end of the day. You guys can start looking into that. Again, I've copied them in my common settings location, but ultimately at the end of the day, they're going here. C users public CTC software licensing this time, not suite settings, but licensing. And this is where everything is looking for it. So you don't have to worry so much about making sure that the files are being put in the right spot. Things are just kind of there. So yeah, these are them, right? Yes, that's it. Okay, found them. So when multi-user installer was installed, here's that location to find them. Program data CTC licensing. This is where they're being deployed to default out of the box. You can grab these and push them to the public folder, and then everyone will have access to them, which is great. So that's where I got them from. Again, it's the suite licensing settings files, and it'll have your license type in here, and you can go ahead and type in either cloud shared or network floating. Trial and node locked are no longer available, so don't even think about it. Network floating and cloud shared are the only ones you need access to. All right. this is a perfect time to answer that question. What is the difference from the suite settings and the ribbon button visibility settings? Fantastic question. So there are two suite settings options in here, right? There's the suite settings and button visibility settings. Both ultimately at the end of the day are doing the same thing. So I'm going to open both of these up here real quick and show you what it does. So they're slightly different in that ribbon button visibility is per machine or per user / per machine. And it involves configuring this accordingly. And you put a little hashtag in front of the app if you don't want users to have access to that. And then you deploy this ribbon button visibility settings file. That works, okay? But then it's the same for that machine. Doesn't matter who's using it. Anyone that's on that machine is getting these results. It's not managed via Active Directory, for example. So in this case here, if I wanted to give everyone access to everything, then we're good to go. But if I wanted to force feed who has access to what, right? Instead of everyone, we do admin and admin and admin. Then everybody has access to Family Exporter and Family Loader, but only my admins will have access to these three. And if then you, regardless of who is logged into that machine, it's reading the Active Directory groups to see who is going to see and have access to what. So they're effectively the same thing, but the suite settings has an extra little bit of control that gives you some additional flexibility if you have like a hotel machine and multiple users access it throughout the day at various roles and permission levels, or maybe it's on your virtual environment and at any time someone could log into that virtual device if they're not directly assigned to any specific person. This method here will give you the most flexibility and control over who has access to what based off Active Directory groups. If you're not doing that, you don't have specific groups set up in that fashion, then deploying the button visibility is equally, but effectively gives you a similar result by turning things off for everyone. So I hope that answered your question, but that was a good time to ask it, so that's why I answered it. Okay. So because the license settings are controlled by at the suite level, in this case, I have two other ones that would need to get placed in the line here. So I'm going to copy those other two over. And because I like notices when I'm testing, I have a little step in here saying what I'm doing. And at the very end of mine, I'm going to put in another notice letting me know that it's done. And I'm adding a pause to the end because that's going to force me to press a button to finish this process. Not necessarily what you're going to want to do for long term, but it might just be another timeout so that it can transition to the next piece within your Software Center script. But that's how I'm going to set it up for today. I'm going to hit save, and then you run it. And this is where right-click Run as Admin comes into play because I'm using the multi-user installs. That's how I'm going to have to install it. Okay. Now, let's do this. Let me clean up a couple things. I'm going to pull up another installation directory that I have just to show you something else here in a second. And I am going to run my setup at the same time. Where did I put? Of course, it's right here. Alrighty. So here's my install. If you build out scripted installs, it's run as administrator. Always. When you're configuring it to run through a PDQ /Software Center / whatever service, software deployment utility you're using, run as administrator, always and forever. Okay, you run it, it's going to pull up your command prompt window, and it does the install to the switches that we told it to run it, and then it copied my suite settings, it copied my license settings, installation complete. Done. And it's that fast, right? There's nothing more to it. It goes really, really, really quick. And if I were to go check my C users public CTC software folder where I had licensing, my license settings files are here. If I take a step back and go to my suite settings files are here. So it's deploying everything accordingly. And whatever configurations I would have added to that are now there. If I were to go ahead and open up another version of Revit and we take a look and see what was installed, it's going to be there. Last piece to this that I want to make sure I point out before I open the door for additional Q&A and let the rest of you go if you don't have any, is that this does work with single installs. Okay, I've got a script here for single user installers. It will work, right? I've got my directory changed. It's still the same calls, MSI exec, BIM Suites single user setup, license settings. I've got additional control built into this so I can determine, do I care about this stuff or do I want everything? But it will work. The only difference in this case is how you run it. Instead of right-click run as admin, you just double-click it. And whoever is logged into the machine at whichever account you've logged in with, that account's going to get the tools. And that's it. So they can both be a scripted installer. And if I jump over here real quick, yep, did what I said. So, yeah. So at this point, I think I've covered everything as much as I needed to cover today, and then some. I'm going to throw out a couple of last little pieces here to make sure you guys have everything you need. Make sure to get your downloads if you don't, or to get the latest version of the downloads, ctcsoftware.com, log into the portal, you get your downloads option here. If you don't have a portal account yet, you can go ahead and make one. Just put in your organization information and you'll get one. When you do make the migration to a cloud license at some point in the future, you'll already have your account set up and we've got a head start. If you don't want to take that route, you just want to get the install link, reach out to your support techs and they can help you get a link, or your sales reps will get you a link for downloads. Second piece to that is on, make sure you choose the appropriate one for your environment, single user, multi-user. And last but not least, if you have questions on the tools themselves or anything else about the products, check out our YouTube channel, CTC Software. And we've got dozens in videos up here on all of the products and the suites if you need them. And then if you run into questions or run into concerns about the setup and you hit some stumbling blocks, reach out to us at support or info@ctcsoftware.com. More than happy to help you out, get you access to everything you need. If you do want access to an example routine, info@ctcsoftware.com. Reference this webinar that you watched, and we'll get you an example copy. And now that we've done all of that, I'll let you guys go because we've been talking a long time. We've had a lot to cover. we've gotten through it all. Congratulations to everybody. And thank you all for joining me today. It's been a pleasure. We look forward to seeing you at the next webinar in a couple of weeks. We'll talk about whatever the topic is next time. Thank you all.